Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Jessie Mahoney, pediatrician and coach. Today's Kevin MD article is Why Don't Women in Medicine Support Each Other? Jessie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me back.
All right, tell us what this latest article is about.
So this article is about this, what may be a hidden phenomenon, or I've discovered is not hidden, that women in medicine don't support each other very well. And it's something that I have known since I began in medicine, but it is something that I've kind of only become brave enough to talk about now. And it's in part because I do retreats for women doctors, and I just hear time and time again their stories. And the thing that we are most disappointed in is that our fellow women in medicine haven't supported us. And so I've kind of been researching, well, why aren't we supporting each other? What's happening? And trying to figure out, I think if we can understand better why it's happening, we can actually work to change it. I don't think it's on purpose. It actually comes from many of those external pressures in medicine. And I think when we put it out in the open, it can be really helpful. And my experience with doing that in very small private spaces is that it is very helpful. It gives people this just tremendous sense of relief that they didn't do something wrong, that it's sort of a cultural phenomenon that we really can change if we want.
Can you share some of the stories that you've heard on your retreats that really show how women in medicine don't support each other?
Well, I can share other stories, and I will share one of my own stories, which I still hold. And this is repeated in different flavors with so many women who come to retreats, especially when you are pregnant. Other women are the hardest about needing time for appointments or needing time for IVF, or if you're having complications. When I was pregnant as a med student, and the person that was hardest on me was a female chief resident who, and I think that the issue there is that people make a lot of sacrifices around child rearing, and many, many women in medicine have trouble with infertility. And so when someone else is pregnant, it creates just a really difficult scenario. And men who I think feel like they don't understand it so well are more compassionate and more forgiving. And I think that we, as women in medicine, there's very much a scarcity mindset. And so there's a scarcity of time with your own family or a scarcity of energy. And so when someone else is having something going on in their life, even if it's a death in the family, maybe you didn't get to take time off for your death in your family, and you feel really frustrated and angry that it weighs on you, and we don't show up as our best selves. And when we're extremely depleted and have no time, we don't show up as our best selves. And I think part of why it's different for women is, for better or worse, women take on those family responsibilities and extended family responsibilities, and they are the one who are bearing the children. And so that piece, they may be the one who needs time to breastfeed. And we just don't, medicine wasn't built for women. We've talked about that before. And so changes then need to happen. And for those of us, myself included, where those changes didn't happen for us, sort of like, well, how come it's different now? And again, that comes from very much our change resistance, but also our scarcity mindset. There's not enough people to fill in. So if this person's out, it will impact me, and I am already stretched as much as I can stretch. And so while I think no one intends to show up that way, it's often the women leaders in medicine who got to leadership by achieving, not by, supporting others. And if they did, they might be judged. And so that has become the culture where we actually, I think, judge our women colleagues almost more harshly.
Now, has anything changed over the last few years? Because we always hear demographically more than half of the medical school class are women. And we hear stories, of course, on my site and on your coaching retreats, on
Yeah.
podcasts, where issues related to women in medicine are being more heard and the stories are being shared. Do you see any improvement over the last few years because of those trends?
Well, I keep thinking yes. And then yesterday, I heard someone who'd had tremendous issues in the last few years, all in the midst of that. And so are there pockets of it? Yes. And I think that the more we bring it to the limelight and shine a spotlight on it, that it is beginning to change. And I think that it really has to change one woman physician at a time. We have to feel safe enough to trust and amplify and really change. We were taught that we had to achieve and that we had to potentially achieve more in order to be seen or
Mhm.
considered in medicine, which has been predominantly male dominated, even though now there are actually more women than men in many medical school classes, but it wasn't built that way. So the message that women get, and many women who are now in leadership roles got, is that we really had to almost achieve more to become a leader in medicine or to succeed. So we've always been focused on that achievement, not necessarily advocating or amplifying the women below us. And maybe that's even another level than just being treating them kindly. I think we want to. And sometimes we feel like we're being protective by saying, well, you have to not share this and you can't ask for anything if you need it. When I remember being on a California Medical Association committee where we were talking about whether women residents should get 6 weeks of leave after having a baby. And I pointed out that it was actually California law and
Mhm.
they're considered disabled. And then the conversation was, how will we cover the residency? How will we cover the shifts? And it's like, well, this is a law, so we have to figure out how to change the system. But being the woman who speaks up there, you often put yourself in a spot where people judge you and you're sort of considered potentially lazy or you don't care about the system. So I think it's hard to stand out and speak up about it. And then our own brain phrases get in our heads
Mhm.
about it as well. Like if you are, advocating and supporting and other women, that there is this scarcity of room for women. We know how few women leaders there are. And so therefore, you have to be really thoughtful and careful. And I think that we could change it. I mean, what I have seen is that those women who have been brave enough to stand up and speak up for other women, they have actually become quite successful because there's such a need. And so, can we each sort of change the culture where we're generous and kind, and sort of recognizing that this is actually our role in medicine is to support other women? I just think we've gone through such challenges that so many of us are closed to sort of like, well, I'm even afraid to still be a woman in medicine. And I think that we really think that it's that's not true anymore.
Mhm.
And yet I see it time and time again. I think what's shifted is actually that it's more the women who are making it harder on other women because that's what we watched and that's what we experienced. And so how do we shift and be brave enough to change it to be a culture that's friendly for that? And the systems are not super friendly for that either. So you
Yeah.
do have to go out on a limb. And it's sometimes harder as a woman to go out on a limb than it would be for someone who felt that sort of level of confidence and acceptance the whole way along.
So, in terms of demonstrating that lack of support, is it primarily covering for women because they have to take time off for after pregnancy and for IVF treatments? Are there other ways where it's shown that women don't support each other in medicine?
Yeah, I would say, we tend to not speak up and amplify other women and talk about what they have done. We tend to judge other women in our department for whatever decisions they might make.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we kind of hold other women, it sounds really strange, but to a higher standard and as women. And so that we treat it, we talked about in one of these podcasts about judgment as a sign of excellence. And I think it comes from that same energy that we see it as excellence, protecting them and protecting sort of our reputation, ours and theirs. And yet what I see is a lot of silent suffering. And could we, support them for leadership roles outwardly and amplify them? And could we speak up? We rarely speak up on behalf of other women saying they're doing this great thing
Mm-hmm.
over here, you should try it. And I think it really does come from one, a scarcity sense of like there isn't enough room. And also that we might be judged for amplifying something that is woman focused. And so that piece, I think, is beginning to change. But within the medicine systems, within the feedback evaluations, and within smaller departments, people may have their one person, that they feel really safe with, but the culture of vulnerability is not there. And I think that when we can shift that, then we will also be supporting our women leaders. And there are pockets of it, certainly. There are certain medical organizations that have, women CEOs and women in high spots. But even there are also pockets where it's not the norm. And so I think until we start to talk about it and actually say that to flip it, we almost need to create a more welcoming culture.
Hmm.
How can we welcome people in? We were all taught in my generation that women had to let their work speak for themselves. And so then we perpetuate that. So we're not supporting because we're just assuming they know that it's also good. And then really think it's a way of saying there's enough room for all of us and we can actually shine more by shining a light on those behind us and supporting them in whatever it is. Sometimes people will want to create something new or step into a role that's different or create a role or create a program. And I think we tend to be more hesitant because I think what we're offering as women in medicine is different than the old culture. So it's
Yeah.
also a resistance to change.
One of the things that you talked about in your piece was the role of mentorship, right? So talk to us about how female physician mentorship can help with this.
It helps tremendously if you have a mentor you can trust. And so part of this, I think, is setting up a mentor system. A lot of mentorship programs within institutions are very well intentioned, but you sort of get this random match. And your mentor is often someone in your department who
Yeah.
is also potentially responsible for your feedback or whether you get a promotion or not. And so figuring out how we can set up mentorships. I think mentorships in some of the broader spaces across institutions can be really valuable. I think also individually as women, as we put ourselves in spaces where there are people in different generations of medicine. So whether it's a subspecialty group or whether it's a retreat or whether it's coaching or even within institutions, we do a lot of women in medicine events you can find your mentor because I
Hmm.
think we really do. We can be assigned someone who helps direct us through the course of things, but there's a lot of conflict there. And I think that you don't necessarily fit with them. So can we create more spaces where people can be inspired and motivated? And then I would say we also need mentorship training. So we understand how we're showing up and how that is received by other people. And so that we can learn and begin to show up in different ways that feel more supportive. We're not taught that in medicine. We're taught to compete. We're taught to achieve rather than to create comfortable spaces that foster growth. We talk about it in medical education, but our medical education system is actually quite judgmental and achievement oriented and judgment oriented. And so, how can we create a space that's actually about healing
Hmm.
for those who are all in this space together? Supporting other women is really healing, also for those of us who've had traumatic experiences along the way, like to feel like you could change it, but you also have to be healed to some degree to do that. And so, a big piece of it, I think, is healing my, mid 50s generation
Hmm.
of women so that we can create those ripples down below. And so potentially having people that are farther ahead, that are not in the same organizations, that are not in the same even specialties, because they can be a mentor for a life in medicine, which is not just practicing medicine, but how do you have a family and how do you care for parents and how do you sort of live in this world that wasn't necessarily built for you.
We're talking to Jessie Mahoney, pediatrician and coach. Today's Kevin MD article is Why Don't Women in Medicine Support Each Other? Jessie, let's have some take home messages they want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
I think that if we could change the way we support one another and consistently, courageously, because it takes courage,
Hmm.
and unapologetically support other women and not worry so much about how we'll be perceived or whether it will impact us, things would dramatically change. And that we don't actually have to wait. We're always waiting for a system to accept us. And yet we can begin by supporting and accepting people above us, below us, pulling out that judgment, and instead creating more of that community, family spirit in medicine.
Jessie, as always, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. Thanks again for coming back on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.